With so many chords to know and think about, it can be overwhelming sometimes when it comes to approaching soloing over chord changes. There's so many arpeggios, so many chord tones, so many scales, enough for us to last a lifetime of learning. Now, major and minor are often taught as sort of polar opposites, happy and sad. Yet when you get into jazz, harmony, extensions, extended chords, the lines start to get blurred. And that's what I'm going to look at today. And I'm going to look at some examples of how you can find chords which are very similar to each other, but you might have treated very differently from each other. Now, this is really useful because it means your arpeggios can work over more than one chord type, and it can simplify the way you look at chord changes. And I've got 4 chord relationships that I think are really important to understand. Let's get on to number 1, major 6 and minor 7. If I took these 2 chords, say a C6 and A minor 7, what would come to mind in terms of their relationship, where you might think, well, they're relative of each other, so A minor is the relative minor of C, C major is the relative major of A minor, which is right. As I said earlier, we're often taught that major and minor are very different. You've got C and A minor, say, down here, but actually that's an easy chord change on the guitar, so they're not that different. It's only one note different. This is C, E and G. A minor is A, C, E. So it's just that one note difference. Now, if we compare C major and A minor 6, a C6 chord contains C, E, G, A. That's the first, third, fifth, and sixth note of the C major scale. If we take A minor 7, we take the first, third, fifth, and seventh note of the A minor scale. We get A, C, E, G. Same notes, just different order. The emphasis on C6 is C in the bass, A minor 7 is A in the bass. So C6, you could say that's an inversion of A minor 7. You could say, if you wanted, A minor 7 is a C6 with the 6 and the bass. Musical context will always kind of give us an indication of whether it's a C6 or an A minor 7. That's great, and you might wonder, well, why is that useful to know? What help is it going to be to me? What it means is anything you normally play over A minor 7, you can play over a C major chord or a C6 chord. And C6 isn't such a stretch from, say, C major 7, so you can stretch the boundaries a little bit as well, and it will work vice versa. Anything you can play over C6 that you normally use, whatever that might be, whether it be arpeggios or scales or ideas, you could try them over an A minor 7 and see how it works. So it's kind of like a buy one get one free, really. So the idea that this is like a chord synonym for this A minor 7. So say, a guitarist might be like, right, I know my A minor pentatonic. That will work over this C6 chord as well as it will work over the A minor 7. It's just if you're really wanting to make it sound like C major, you might make C the more important note that you resolve to than, say, A. Say if I did that finishing on an A, whereas if I want to think about C major, I might finish on a C, so it says more C than A minor 7. Now, if you start to get into the Barry Harris world of harmony, you can get into his 6 diminished scale, which, harmonizing chords is this. It's going to be hard there. Now, that is alternating between inversions of C6 and D diminished, but it gives you these lovely 6 chords going there, or A minor 7, depending on how you look at it. There's C6 there, and then in first inversion, which you might think of as like a A minor 7 shape, C6 in second inversion, and then there it is at the top there. So you could view these all as, A minor 7s or C6, and they could work in that way. Take a 2-5-1 in G, so which would normally go A minor 7, D7, G, might go like that. Let's try using some of those shapes instead of A minor 7. I could go C6 or A minor 7 with the third in the bass, D7, G. Use this one, A minor 7, D7, G6 maybe. Another C6 or A minor 7. So it gives you some beautiful options, and then we could do that vice versa. We'd say we've got a progression going to C, D minor 7, G to C. Let's use C6 instead of C major 7. I don't know why everyone always defaults to major sevens. You know, sixes are beautiful too. So here we go. D minor 7, G7, C6. D minor 7, G7. Let's go to this voicing. There, that sounds nice. D minor 7, G7. This voicing is C6. And again. That one sounds, because it's got A in the bass, it sounds more like A minor 7 to me, but if the bass player was playing C, it would probably sound just fine. So that's the first relationship I'd like you to explore, major 6 and minor 7. Now, how do you know the relationship? It's all based on the relatives. Here's a circle of fifths on the screen. C6 and A minor 7 are the same, so let's look at G major. So E minor 7, G major, and G major 6 share the same notes. The next relationship I want to look at is between minor 7 flat 5 and minor 6 chords. In the same way as a major 6 and a minor 7th, every minor 7 flat 5 is the same as has a paired minor 6th chord. So if we took B minor 7 flat 5 down here, the notes are B, F, A, D. Now in order in terms of harmony, it's B, D, F, A, root 3rd, 5th, 7th. If we took D minor 6, say here, there's the notes on the screen, same notes. Just now it's D, F, A, B, in terms of if I play it as arpeggio. Listen to these two, B minor 7 flat 5, D minor 6. You can look at this B minor 7 flat 5 and call it a minor 7 flat 5, or you could call it a D minor 6 with the 6th and the bass. If I harmonise these chords up the neck, we'd have... You could look at any of those as viable chord shapes for either the minor 7 flat 5, the B, or the D. And how you're going to remember this one is they're a minor third apart, B to D, there. So let's take a progression which the minor 7 flat 5 chord is very central to it. So the 2-5-1 in A minor, let's do, you could go B minor 7 flat 5, E7 to A minor. We could use that D minor 6 shape instead of this B minor 7 flat 5. We could go then the E7, A minor. I think that sounds really beautiful. Could use any of these other shapes. Really nice. And this is what the value of knowing your chords up and down the neck and inversions. It can lead to really interesting movements that go beyond the sort of real, not boring, but I mean, it's not boring, it's essential, but basic root movement that you often get in sort of a lot of rhythm guitar. Just hear how beautiful that can become. We could have, or maybe using that C6 there instead of the A minor 7. So for chord playing, you could conceivably use a minor 7 flat 5 shape or a minor 6 shape, vice versa. There is obviously this thing, in regards to playing other people, hearing the roots, hearing the movements. You have to be sensitive to the people you're playing with to do this. It's very common in gypsy jazz, for instance, to treat this voicing as a D minor 6. Not so much in mainstream jazz, I don't think, because it doesn't have the D in the bass. So that's in terms of chord playing. Those two shapes can sub out for each other because they are the same notes. It's just the emphasis, depending on the inversion you play them, changes. Now, when it comes to single note playing, you can think of things like, oh well, I normally use over, minor 6 or minor chords, D minor pentatonic. Means you could use that over the top of this B minor 7 flat 5 chord and it will work just fine. Which is a useful thing to know, because often when we talk about what scales or things to use over a minor 7 flat 5 chord, things can get complicated pretty quickly. But if you can use minor pentatonic over it, then that's something that's quite accessible to most guitar players. I said there was 4 relationships, and the next relationship just builds on the last one, in that it really doesn't stop there. This is a family of chords, if you like, and it keeps giving. So B minor 7 flat 5, D minor 6 share the same notes as each other, but there's another chord which is very similar. Like if you take this B minor 7 the flat 5 chord down here, or D minor 6, depending on how we're looking at it, and again context will help us with that. If you played a lot of blues, you might recognise that as a chord that T-Bone Walker likes to use a lot. You know, thinking of Stormy Monday. Loads of blues guitar players use this shape. Now, what is this shape? It's a rootless dominant ninth chord. If I put the G in the bottom, that's the root of it. So it's a G9 without a G. So it's going B, F, A, D, as a G9 is G, B, D, F, A. So interesting, because the bass player will probably play the G, it works. Now this relationship isn't that surprising when you think that, okay, so G9 is just like a variation on G7 really. D minor 7, G7, that's the 2-5 of a 2-5-1 in C. So we've got D minor 6 being really closely related, well, being the same notes as a G9, albeit without the root. So what use is this to you? Well, what it means is, you know, chord shapes of these can swap for each other. It also means single note wise, you got D minor 6. You could use a G7 based idea. You might want to resolve it into the, you know, be careful what notes you resolve to, but it would work. You could use any of your B minor 7 flat 5 stuff, like say this idea. This is a B minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio against a G7. That's going to sound great. A beat starting on a G7 like that, D minor 6. All these things will work over the top of that G7. And for each other, B minor 7 flat 5 2 and D minor 6 2. So far we've had the relationship between the major 6 and the minor 7 chord, the relationship between the minor 7 flat 5 chord and the same notes for another minor 6 chord, and then we've had actually that minor 7 flat 5 and that minor 6 are also really similar to a ninth chord, albeit without a root. B minor 7 flat 5, B D F A, D minor 6, D F A B, G9, G B D F A. The final relationship I want to look at today is the relationship between dominance and diminished chords. If we take this C sharp diminished chord here, C sharp, it's got the following notes: C sharp, G, B flat, E. Now, if you know about your diminished chords, you can move them up the fretboard in intervals of minor thirds like this. It's actually the same notes, just inverting. So C sharp diminished 7th, same notes as E diminished 7th, G diminished 7th, and B flat diminished 7th. That's cool in itself, worth knowing. But equally worth knowing is the fact if you lower one note, any one note, we get a dominant chord. So if we lower, say, the C sharp in this chord to a C, we get C7. So that C sharp diminished, with lowering one note, yields a C7. Now, what's the relationship between the two? C7 is C, E, G, B flat. Whereas that diminished was C sharp, E, G, and B flat. The C sharp, what's that in relation to a C? Well, it's a flat 9. So you can treat this C sharp diminished 7th as a C7 flat 9 without C. You hear there? You use it instead of a C. Let's take I don't know, this. So I'm going G minor 7, albeit inverted, C sharp diminished 7th, or you could say it's C7 flat 9 with the flat 9 in the bass, to an F6 with the 5th in the bass. Really beautiful sound. So there it's working there instead of a C7. Now, going back earlier, we had these 4 diminished chords. If I lower the note on the A string each time, we're going to get another dominant. So take this E diminished 7th, lower the note on the A string, we've got E flat 7. Take the G diminished 7th, lower the note on the A string, becomes G flat 7 or F sharp 7. B flat diminished 7th, lower the note on the A string, get A7. And actually, those 4 chords, those 4 diminished chords, they're all the same notes, so they all work together and can work in place of each other. A common way of using this, if we had C, A minor 7 to D minor 7, or in fact, no, sorry, if we had C major 7, say, says A7 to D minor 7, probably finishing off with a 6, like a 1, 6, 2, 5. That A7 is like a secondary dominant going to the D minor 7. Remember our B flat diminished up here? Lower one note becomes A7. Now we can take any of these diminished chords, same 4 notes, so let's use this C sharp diminished instead of A7. So let's go C major 7, C sharp diminished, leads perfectly into D minor 7. Let's do that. As opposed to the root movement's better because we're moving up in semitones on the A string there. So every dominant 7th chord has diminished chords which are related to it. There's more to this. It creates 4 dominant chords which are related to each other, something I'll cover in another video. But you can think of those diminished chords as a dominant flat 9, dominant 7 flat 9 sound. And that's how they're often used. And those diminished chords are used like dominants as a result. So there's a relationship between these diminished chords, but then there's also a relationship, because we're only changing one at a time, between C7, E flat 7, G flat 7, and A7. Something we'll talk about another time. So takeaways, what do you do with all of this information? Well, for me, if you start to get your head around some of these relationships, it really starts to help with understanding why chord progressions from one version of changes for a standard to another can be different. For example, it's very common for people to play a minor 4 chord as a dominant 9th chord. And if you remember earlier, one of those relationships was between a minor 6th chord and a dominant 9th chord. Like we looked at the G9, albeit rootless, versus the D minor 6. So because of those relationships, sometimes people go for certain chords when someone else might think, oh no, I play a minor chord there, or I play a minor 6 chord there. The other thing I think that's really fantastic about learning all this sort of information and relationships between chords is if you find a certain chord type difficult to solo for whatever reason, you have a mental block with it. Let's say minor 7 flat 5 chords, the half diminished chord, you just freak out a little bit, you don't know what to do with those. Well, like B minor 7 flat 5, if you know about the relationship to D minor 6, then hopefully you're cool with your D minor stuff, whether it be triads, arpeggios or scales, and you can use those. And there's a pinch of salt here. You obviously have to be careful, use your ear for what works and what notes you want to resolve to, but these relationships can be really helpful for simplifying things and just cutting out some chords or making your life easier. If you've got any questions, any comments, or any other relationships you think I should cover, then leave me a comment below. Don't forget jazz guitar lessons every Wednesday and Saturday. If you've gained value from today's lesson, please hit that like button, as it really does help boost the channel. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.